always excited to talk to this guy, one of our favorite follows on X. You can follow him at MySportsUpdate. Covers the NFL for the 33rd team. The one, the only, Ari Meirov. How you doing, Ari?
Hey, Ari.
It is great to be back. Great to be back with the video on. It's been phone call the last few times, but it's great to see everybody. A full house over here.
Absolutely. Full house here. And Ari, let me start with this because we're still trying to figure out how the Lions gave us all whiplash and lost that game to the Washington Commanders. How would you characterize the Lions season, 15-2, and not winning a playoff game? How would you characterize their season?
I mean, the ending obviously hurts, and I'm sure you guys are probably still in that grieving period. But it was a very difficult end. But at the same time, I think it's safe to say that the injury just caught up with them, and maybe you're able to do it in the regular season and find a way around it. But once you get into postseason football and everyone's playing 110%, at some point the talent level does come into play. And the Commanders were running the momentum of beating the Buccaneers the week before. There's a bunch of guys on that team who didn't really have much playoff experience, who didn't even know what they were doing out there, to the point that they didn't realize how big the moment was. And they basically played as if it was a regular game for them. And they went head-to-head, and they were playing from ahead eventually, and they were able to stay ahead in that game. But the injury that the Lions had this year does not happen often around the NFL. Like, the Chargers are one team that always had that year in and year out where they always had a lot of injuries. But it's normal to have some injuries in the NFL, but the amount that the Lions had this year was astronomical, and they were able to still win 15 games, get the 1 seed, win in Week 18 and all of that. But once it got to playoff football and they ran into Washington, it just felt like the gas all ran out and a magical season came to an end way too early.
And then to fast forward where we are right now, after the Lions lose to the Commanders, Ben Johnson takes a job not 48 hours later with the Chicago
36.
Bears. 36 hours. Thanks, Maz. Aaron Glenn gets a job, days after that. But nonetheless, Cliff Kingsbury, the Washington Commanders, did not interview for jobs during the playoff run. Joe Brady in Buffalo did not interview for head coaching jobs while his team was still in the playoffs. Bill Belichick has said that he believes the rules should change. I think a lot of fans in Detroit are taken aback, especially when you lose like the Lions lost, 5 turnovers in that game, that Ben Johnson, was he, quote-unquote, distracted? Obviously not, but the argument could be made that his mind was somewhere else. What do you make of the NFL's policy to allow these coaches who are in the playoffs the ability to interview for other jobs?
The NFL has made tweaks to the entire coaching cycle year after year, changing things, trying to really make the process go longer. But this has been an issue that many teams in the playoffs have said for a long time. It bothers them. And I'm not going to say the reason the Lions lost is because Aaron and Ben took interviews during their bye week, nonetheless. It was not during the actual week. But I do think it's a bit of an issue, but there is no real solution. The only one where I've spoken to executives and coaching agents and people who are involved in this process is if you move the entire calendar once the offseason starts, because as soon as the Super Bowl is over, the Combine is 2 weeks later. So you really need to have your coaching staff in place and ready to go. If the NFL ever said, you know what, let's move the Combine to March, let's move free agency to the end of March, let's move the draft into May, then maybe you could see changes to the coaching hires where you cannot make a hire and you cannot interview anybody who's in the playoffs. Like, I could see the NFL maybe considering that, where in a way that makes the offseason even longer. There's more things to talk about, and there won't even be that dead period that we usually have in May or June because you're pushing everything forward another month. But the NFL has never gotten that far, and I've always wondered, does it affect the team when there are coaches who are in the playoff run basically doing interviews and having their agents telling them, hey, I have this, I have that, they would do this, they would offer this money and whatever. And that's definitely in the back of your mind. At the same time, those agents and the coach himself are also working on their staff as well. So there are definitely juggling going on throughout all of this, but I don't think it affected the Lions as much as it affected other teams simply because they had that bye week. And that's where Ben and Aaron really did a lot of their work when it comes to their coaching. Once that week officially started, Ben's agent, Rick Smith, and Aaron's agent, Jimmy Sexton, they basically cut off communication when it comes to all this on Ben and Aaron's request. So I wouldn't fault them for that. But for teams who play in the wild card round and basically had those conversations as well, that's where it's a little bit complicated. And it's something the NFL has tried to do. They did change the schedule this year, but it still affects people for sure.
All right, 2 times in the last couple of weeks, man. We're a lucky show to have you. Get to talk to you. 2 questions for me. One, obviously, Detroit Lions, they lose their offensive coordinator, their defense coordinator, and a couple other coaches. With that, where are you with Dan Campbell being able to lead this team next season in the 2025 season with losing Ben Johnson, with losing Aaron Glenn? Where are you in the capability, where are you with Dan Campbell as a head coach leading this team in 2025 without those guys? Are you confident that he can get back to this level or further, or are you want to see it?
Here's what I would say. Dan Campbell's not an idiot. He knew that Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn eventually are going to leave. Lions fans and Dan Campbell himself should be grateful that they even stayed in next year, because Ben could have taken a job the last 2 cycles before this one. So he knew that this time was eventually going to come. It probably hurts his soul, just like it hurts every Lions fan, that while they were there, they couldn't reach the big game, and it's obviously they're no longer there. But he knew this day was coming, and Dan is a smart person. He's a forward thinker. He has been thinking about this day and what it would look like eventually once they leave. And I think I've been on the show before. I've mentioned the name Calvin Shepard. I was at the Senior Bowl 3 or 4 years ago, where he was on that Lions staff that was coaching the Senior Bowl. His energy is infectious. He is somebody who has been an up-and-coming, rising coach. For me, I've had him on my list that I've done on the 33rd team. It's not a surprise to me that he's a defensive coordinator already. It's been a really quick rise for him. And I think Dan Campbell ID'd him very early on as somebody who could take over for Aaron Glenn. Then the John Moran hire, he has been somebody who clearly as well, he's been eyeing him as well. He was in Detroit previously. The job that he did with the Jets when he was the offensive coordinator, I think it was in 2017, I'm from New York. That Jets roster was as pathetic as it gets, and he got a lot out of them. So Dan Campbell has clearly been keeping an eye on him as well for whenever Ben Johnson does leave. And he is somebody who was impressive in that 1 year, considering the roster the Jets had. It was like Josh McCown and Bilal Powell and Austin Seferian Jenkins. They were not good players. The offensive line was not great, and he got the most out of them. Now you're giving him this team, this offensive line, that quarterback, those running backs, those receivers. I think Dan Campbell believes that he has the right 2 men over there ready to come in. Will they be Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn? Probably not. But are they going to have a really, really good roster around them and Dan Campbell's full trust? Yes, they will.
I appreciate that. And the second question, it's about one of those coordinators you mentioned, Aaron Glenn. Now with my team, the New York Jets, what are your thoughts on the Jets landing Aaron Glenn, former player for the New York Jets? It seems like, to me, a really good fit. A lot of my fellow alums are very excited with the picks. We've been on the message boards exchanging information. We feel like, especially me, I got a chance to see him for the last 4 years. I think it's a great pick. What are you with the New York Jets and Aaron Glenn?
So, the 33rd team, which is where I work at, we actually helped Woody Johnson and that entire organization to help make this GM hire and the head coach hire. And Aaron Glenn stood out. Aaron Glenn, he stood out right away. And he wanted that job from the beginning, of course, being a first-round pick with that team, playing there early on in his career, making Pro Bowls. Of course, when he finished playing, he started his scouting career there. And now he's starting his head coaching career there. He stood out for them as a leader, a culture guy. They need somebody who could hold people accountable and could do more than just talking. And basically, they view Aaron Glenn basically what Dan Quinn did in Washington in year 1. Defensive mind doesn't make a difference what he is, but they think he could rally this team around. There's so much talent still on this roster that people don't recognize that, whether it's from premium positions. You look at Garrett Wilson, you look at Olufashano up front in the offensive line, Elijah Vera-Tucker. They have 2 good pass rushers, Jermaine Johnson, Will McDonald. The secondary, you have Sauce Gardner. There are players on this Jets roster, and they're going to keep on adding to be here this offseason. And Aaron Glenn, when he went into that interview, he made it clear to everybody, this is the job that I want, and if you want me, I'm ready to do this. So they quickly ID'd him as one of the guys that they wanted, brought him in for a second interview, got that deal done last week. And this is somebody else that you mentioned, Braylon. A lot of former Jets players told Woody Johnson directly, if you want the Jets to be great, we have not been in the playoffs in 14, 15 years, the longest drought out of all the 4 main U.S. sports. You better hire Aaron Glenn. And I think that resonated with Woody, and it also resonated with the rest of the search committee, who quickly said, this is our guy.
I wish him luck, Ari. I do. Being a New Yorker, I love the Jets and Giants, and I always called the Jets the Lions of the AFC. I mean, they won a Super Bowl, and I'm wearing a Joe Namath sweatshirt right now. But they were an AFL team. They weren't even in the NFL at that point. So to me, they are the Lions of the AFC. But getting back to the Chiefs, let me tell you, man, there's no bigger NFL fan than me, but I'm getting fatigued of the officials ruining the game. And I believe they're ruining the game. What can they do to make it better? I mean, to give that spot that Josh Allen got was a bad spot. The guy at the bottom of the TV screen could not see him, but they went with his call instead of the guy that actually saw. He gave him the right foot. It should have been a first down. There was a catch by Xavier Worthy earlier in that game that wasn't a catch. It just seems that everything is going their way. And then when Dalton Schultz, who was the Dalton Kincaid. There was a phantom flag on that play. In case he caught it, there might have been a flag for holding or illegal hands to the face. Look, man, I'm tired. What can they do to fix this?
Well, let me just start by saying I'm not one of the people who believes, the refs are, Chiefs fans or are rigging the games. I mean, I've spoken to Dean Blandino and many people from the officiating department. If only you knew what the refs go through. Okay, other people as well from the Mike Pereira, whoever you want to say. I've spoken to. All right, Walt Anderson. I've spoken to him as well. I mean, I don't know who you do like, but I've spoken to many people about this. If only you knew what the NFL does when it comes to refereeing and who becomes referees. Like, they have access to their bank accounts. They know everything, every little detail about these guys. So the games are not rigged. Now, I do agree there have been situations this year with not just the Chiefs, but other teams as well, where it's like, okay, that looks a bit weird and that's a bit questionable. Now, Roger Goodell is going to have his usual press conference that he has at the Super Bowl next week in New Orleans. These questions are going to be brought up. Now, Roger is the king of just giving word salad and saying absolutely nothing. Yeah. But I'm really curious to see if he's able to actually open up and say something about the future of officiating using more technology, which the NFL has started to adapt a little bit, but they need more of it. The chains, there's obviously eventually they're looking to move on from it as long as the technology makes sense, whether it's putting a chip in the football as well. That has been discussed. But there's many different things the NFL could do over here to make it better so the fans who do believe in this entire rigged thing that is a narrative on Twitter could finally end it. Because it's also not good for the game of football for all the average fans who don't follow it as closely as we do, because it's a bad look for the league. So I think Roger Goodell is upset at it. It's become a narrative, and I'm really curious to see what he says over here next week when he's asked about the officiating, the future of it, and just the narrative that's building around the Kansas City Chiefs.
I've been reading about the dynamic kickoff coming back. They love it. But let me say something about the dynamic kickoff. I don't really care about that. I do care about the onside kick. So it affects me as a football fan. To me, they have taken that completely out of the game. It's, 3% this year? To make it, you can't do it unless you're behind. You can't do it unless you're in the fourth quarter. You have to tell the other team you're doing it. It's a bad look. And for the 30-second play clock or whatever the play clock is, how about a buzzer? Because it's a second past when the 30-second clock is over. And you know that. Just give me a buzzer like the NBA does.
So the NFL, the officiating, for whatever reason, has always, when it comes to the play clock, always gives you that extra 1 second buffer before officially blowing the whistle. I don't know the reason for that, but that's just the way it's been. As for the kickoff rule, the onside kick, I understand people like the surprise on kick, but how often do we actually see it? Like, I kind of understand the NFL saying, you know what, we need to change the kickoff rules for health and safety and the concussion problems and the fact that it became a bit of a bathroom break or a ceremonial play basically before that. Last year's Super Bowl that we had, 13 kickoffs, 13 touchbacks. Like, the NFL doesn't want that play. So they had to give something away in order to make the change. And they have seen more returns this year. But I will say that I think they want to make it even more exciting. And part of that change might just be, right now, a touchback with this kickoff goes to the 30-yard line.
Yeah.
I think they want to consider making the touchback to the 35-yard line.
Yes, or 40.
Right. In other words, or in other words, to make it more of a chance for more returns and more things happening over here with the play. So I think that's something the NFL will consider over here this offseason. They have to vote on this dynamic kickoff once again in March when the owners meet in Florida. But once they do, it would not surprise me if they make some more tweaks to it. So there's more action coming out of kickoffs next year.
Jake Bates, our guy, he kicks it in the end zone every single time. He led the NFL in touchbacks. If you really want to, I know I'm going to the bathroom when he's kicking the ball. I mean, I don't think there's any more excitement to this kick.
So if you move it to the 35, now if you're a head coach, do I really want them to start at the 35, or should I actually let them return it and trust my special teams to make a tackle before the 35-yard line? That's the math that the NFL is going to be thinking about over here, because Kyle Shanahan, Dan Campbell, they're like, you know what, screw it. I don't want to risk a potential long kickoff or kickoff return for a touchdown. I'd rather just have them start at the 30. But if you move it to the 35, it becomes more of a discussion. So I do think NFL owners are going to talk about that here this offseason.
Okay.
Talking to Ari Meirov, who covers the NFL for the 33rd team. Ari, who is the biggest? That's all right.
My bad, guys.
Ari, who is the biggest quarterback available? Free agent, not free agent, just available. For instance, Kirk Cousins. Maybe he's available.
Arnold.
Who is that guy this year?
Well, the quarterback market this year right now is poised to be Sam Darnold at the top. He is going to become a free agent. I don't envision the Vikings extending him on a big deal. So he's going to become a free agent. I think the last 2 weeks of the year obviously hurt him a little bit, but I still think he should be able to get a Baker Mayfield type deal, which is 3 years at about $33 million per year. Where that is a different question. Russell Wilson will become a free agent. I do think Kirk Cousins, I know the Falcons said we're willing to keep him as the backup. I'll tell you right now, he will not be the backup in Atlanta next year. I think he more than likely gets cut. And wherever he ends up going, he could sign for a minimum contract just like Russell Wilson did in Pittsburgh, because he's still getting paid in Atlanta. So I think that is a bit attractive. So those are your three top veteran quarterbacks. I think the Derek Carr situation in New Orleans is also interesting because his contract essentially is cuttable, and there's been a lot of talk over there that he might not be the future there anymore. So those are probably four veteran quarterbacks. And then the draft, you're going to hear a lot of Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, which I'll tell you right now, they will go high in the draft. But the top four quarterbacks taken last year, that is Caleb, Jaden, Drake May, and even J.J. McCarthy, would all be ahead of those two guys in this year's draft.
Without question, I totally agree with you.
How about Aaron Rodgers?
That's what I was just going to ask next. Aaron Rodgers, is it Jets or nobody? Or are there, like the Titans, for instance? Is that a possibility out there?
So Aaron Rodgers is a different discussion because, first of all, Aaron Glenn has already been talking to him. Just from my knowledge and my understanding, I don't think he will be back with the Jets. Now, the question now becomes more about, does he want to continue playing, which we all know Aaron Rodgers and the attention that he garners and his offseason routine and what he does and how he decides and whatever. So this might take a little bit of time for him just to figure out, do I want to continue playing? Where will that be? There are going to be options there. I mean, the Raiders are one, the Titans are two. I think the Colts are going to be looking for a quarterback at least to be there of Anthony Richardson. So there are going to be options out there in the NFL coming up over here this offseason, but Aaron has to decide first, does he want to continue playing? And I'll say now, and I'll bite my tongue if I'm wrong, I do not see him back with the Jets next year. I don't think Aaron Glenn or the new GM, Darren Mugi, want to go into this new era with the entire Aaron Rodgers circus of it. I think they want to find their own guy.
You mentioned the Raiders, Ari. The Raiders are an interesting team to me because that is a team that they've got nothing. I mean, from my perspective anyway, they've got nothing. Pete Carroll is there. Maybe he's just a culture guy. I mean, I love Pete Carroll, but somebody to just help build a foundation perhaps. But what do you do if you're the Raiders? And Tom Brady seems to be really running the show there. Perhaps a potential conflict between running the Raiders and calling all these games for Fox.
Well, I'll push back a little bit on the nothing because I do think they have some pieces here. And just like Detroit had so many injuries, the second most injuries this year was in Las Vegas. I mean, they do have Brock Bowers was an outstanding rookie. Max Crosby is an elite pass rusher. They have Christian Wilkins, who suffered, obviously, a season-ending injury. They have an offensive line where 2 to 3 guys who I would say are cornerstone young guys who are starting right now, including 2 guys that they drafted last year. So there are pieces there on that roster. And just like I came on the show 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and said I believe in Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, I don't know how long Pete Carroll will be there. I'm just telling you right now, the GM hire that the Raiders made with John Svitek, he is of somebody who has been very, very well deserving of a GM job. He's a big reason why the Buccaneers have so many homegrown players who they drafted. This past year, the Buccaneers, 46 out of the 53 players on the roster were people that they drafted were signed as undrafted free agents. This is somebody who is a scout, who knows how to find players, and he is somebody who I do believe is going to fix up this Raiders and bring in some really, really good players, foundational players who will be there for a long time. So I do have some belief that the Raiders could get back over here and figure this out. Their division is arguably the toughest one, or the second toughest one behind the NFC North, so that will be difficult. But I look at the Raiders, I do think they have some foundational pieces. The quarterback thing, that's going to be a discussion that John and Pete Carroll are going to have. Pete wants to win right now. I think John wants to build this from the ground up, so we'll see how that relationship goes. But I would keep an eye on a Sam Darnold, and I would keep an eye on Russell Wilson potentially reuniting over here with Pete Carroll in Las Vegas. And he's just trying to have a culture type of year, bring in that culture and basically build it up for 1 year. And eventually I think the year 2 of the Raiders are where they try to make that jump. So I would not sleep on the Raiders. I know they've been really, really bad for many, many years, and they've had no stability and a new coach and a new GM over and over and over again. I think they definitely got it right with the GM hire, and I think they got the right coach over here to at least try to bring in the culture for a couple of years before handing it over to somebody younger.
Hey, Ari, nice to talk to you again on video this time. And I just wanted to get your opinion on, what do you think has been the best coaching hire so far, and what has been the biggest surprise to you? Because we have moves like the Ben Johnson move that's been celebrated, and moves like the Brian Schottenheimer move, which everybody has destroyed to this point, and Jerry Jones is looking kind of senile. But what has been the best coaching hire to you, and what has been the biggest surprise to you?
I mean, the biggest surprise definitely lands in Dallas. And listen, I think, I don't know if you guys, Braylon remembers this, but Brian Schottenheimer, when he was with the Jets, was basically Ben Johnson back then. That's the way he was viewed. He was supposed to be the next big head coaching guy. Everyone wanted to interview him, and he was like, no, I'm not ready. I'm going to take my time. And eventually, he flamed out with the Jets and basically never got that opportunity. So I'm happy that he's getting this chance, but the Cowboys, they moved on from Mike McCarthy, and everyone was like, you know what, fine, let's move on from him. Let's get in a fresh voice, a new guy over here. There was all that talk about Dion and, bringing in a big name or doing something like crazy. And then all of a sudden you decide, you know what, we're just going to elevate that OC, who is not calling plays, by the way, to now become our HC, just so we could have over here continuity, and we're able to not pay that much money for the guy. So I just didn't understand that hire. If you're going to move on from Mike, at least bring in somebody new and try to start fresh and start a new era over here. If not, just hold on to Mike and keep on going with him, because he did have 3 12-win seasons. He did have that team playing really hard last year. Despite the fact that they had so many injuries, they were still playing hard until the very end. So if you're going to move on from Mike, go bring in somebody completely new, and they didn't do that. So that was surprising to me, and that's just, again, Jerry being Jerry, and he lives in his own world, and we let him do that. As for the most impressive hire, I'm going to go with, I like what the Jets did. We spoke about it a second ago, but they needed somebody who could hold people accountable and could basically get that building back into place. And right now, I'm from New York, like I said before. That building has been a dumpster fire the last year and a half. There's been leaks galore over there. Everyone is talking to the media and trying to point fingers. They need somebody who could be, this is the way it's supposed to be done. We're the New York Jets, and we're going to do this the right way, and enough is enough. And that's basically what the search was all about over here. And basically, they identified Aaron Glenn early on as somebody who could basically hold people accountable and get people to do their job and shut their mouths. So, as I said, there's a lot of talent on this roster. They're going to reset, I believe, at the quarterback position, and they're going to try to turn this around as soon as possible. So I just like that hire, just knowing where this organization has been the last couple of years and how dysfunctional the building has been. He is moving on from a lot of people who were there over here over this last couple of years. He wants to start fresh from all 3 levels of the building, from the front office, the coaching staff, and also ownership committed to him that we are not going to meddle at all. So this is a new era for the Jets, and Aaron Glenn, I think, is the right guy over there.
Last one, Ari. The other side of MetLife Stadium is a disaster. How Joe Shane has a job, I'll never know. You're interviewing. You just had Xavier McKinney on. former Giant. They let him walk. A couple of weeks ago, you had Kirby Joseph. I just want to say, what the Giants have done, Saquon Barkley, MVP, they let these guys walk out of the building. How does this guy still have a job? John Mara, I think, has made a big mistake.
The only reason that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll still have a job is simply because John Mara does not want to move on from the head coach and GM again after just 2 or 3 years. If you remember the cycle they've been going through, the Giants were viewed and are still kind of viewed as a first-class organization, the model organization. Like, that's the way they used to be viewed, right? Now, if you look after they moved up from Tom Coughlin, they had Ben McAdoo for 2 years and gone, Pat Shurmur for 2 years and gone, Joe Judge for 2 years and gone. It was just in, out, in, out. That's the way these dysfunctional organizations look like. So John Mara, the owner, was like, I've had Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen here for 3 years. We had 1 year where we had a lot of success. We've had 2 years where we were in abomination and really bad. Am I really going to pull the plug again after just now 3 years instead of 2 years? And he was like, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I want to give them one more shot of year to try to build this up. So you're right, Maz. I mean, McKinney out of the building, Saquon out of the building, Leonard Williams, Julian Love, extending Daniel Jones. Even the way the entire Daniel Jones thing ended last year was very dysfunctional and not great. So there's been a lot of messes there in New York. But had the 3 previous head coaching stuff did not happen with Judge, McAdoo, and Shurmur, I think they would have been gone after this year. But because they've had so many in, out, in, out, in, out, which makes them look like the Jets and these other bad teams, the Browns and all that, that's why I think John Mara was like, you know what? I'm going to be patient. I'm going to have continuity here. I'm going to give them one more shot of here. But if it repeats once again next year, you could basically write in a pen right now. They're going to be gone over there. But the one thing the Giants did, by the way, possibly. But the one thing the Giants did, by the way, that I guarantee you they regret is doing the Hard Knocks last year, that offseason thing. That thing is never going to stop following them. I mean, it's bad. It did not go over well at all.
Ugly.
Ari, we can't thank you enough for the time you spent with us today, my man.
Thank you, Ari.
And you're always very gracious with your time. We really appreciate it. Ari Meirov, everybody, 33rd Team NFL, and, of course, at My Sports Update. Thanks, my friend.
Thanks,
buddy.
Ari.
Anytime, my friends.
You got it. You got it.